Welcome back, folks, to episode 117 of the Running Man Self-Regulation Skills Project podcast with me, your host, Dr. Armando Dominguez, PhD in health psychology, licensed professional counselor, and an adjunct professor at a local community college. What we're going to be discussing today is going to be what is known in the Chinese martial arts as Qi and the Lord of Strength, which when translated translates to vitality, air, and breath. So we're going to be discussing not only breath, but breathing, but the fact that it's so foundational to everything that we do. And in this podcast, we cover methods of self-regulatory skill that range from not only the physiological, but birth control and also meditation and visualization type things that are practical and usable right now, but also strategic tools that are not only subjective thought process, but also things that impact our objective, our experience. But no matter what it is that we do, not just with what we're doing on this podcast, but anything you do as a human in this lifetime is founded on the breath. Anything you've ever done, if you think about it, is going to involve breathing. So what we're going to talk about are some of the differences in breath and what self-regulatory skill looks like within the breath itself, and what are we regulating. And regulation does not always mean control and take away and less, but also it could include, and sometimes does, include upregulation. We're going to talk about downregulation, and we're going to talk about the three types of breath where we're hyperoxic and where we're taking more oxygen, and hypercapnic where we have more CO2, but also when we're in residual O2 saturation, or what we call residual breath in the martial arts. And we will kind of talk about how useful that is in situations that are not only domestic, but even personal and business, and how useful those tools are when we're trying to keep a handle on things, or maybe you're having to navigate something such as a physical altercation or one that could become physical, and how to regulate what it is that my reactivity is going to be without necessarily allowing it to unravel in a negative way. So for starters, what we're going to do is look at upregulation and downregulation as an idea when we breathe. And the reason I want to touch upon these is this podcast is a self-regulation project. That means it's a work in progress. It's not something that you get all at once, but you do get benefit right away if you do some of these things. But also long-term, you gain skill, and there is a more profound benefit over time that conditions our body to become more resilient, if you will, and also more controlled in stressful situations by virtue of conditioning or practice, because in essence, we've immersed ourselves. We practice this, and I've been there before, got the t-shirt. So no surprises. And then the state of stress, maybe not the situation, but the state of feeling stress in the body is now no longer novel. It's one that I'm familiar with, and it doesn't freak you out. And the term freak out, in quotes, is a higher cognitive process where I've created a judgment, the name, and a label. And we realize the lack of freak out doesn't mean my allowing myself to have an opinion or a judgment, but rather when this occurs as a result of the body being overwhelmed or reacting to an environment rather quickly and then having an opinion after the fact. But the freak out occurs in a preconscious sense. It's preconscious in the sense of not higher cognitive. I should have said precognitive, as in lower perceptual, before it becomes a higher processing issue at the PFC or the frontal cortex. Now, the upregulation that I'm talking about often, depending on the level of stress, can be impacted by not only thought, kind of like when we talk about the lemon and salivating, and it doesn't matter which lemon for how many years ago, or even somebody else just saying the word lemon, telling you about their experience, or maybe seeing somebody actually bite it, but you're not, and yet your body responds to the imagery inside as a recollection and drops pituitary hormone, and therefore we salivate. That means we have a concrete, measurable response that science knows about and that fMRI technology has measured, and yet we have an impact. It's palpable, it's real, it's physical. It's not all in your head, and it's not a matter of I choose to believe this, but rather it's compelling enough and believable enough that I react to it because it is either a threat or a potential promise of food, if I haven't eaten in a long time, in my environment. Sometimes what we perceive as threat in our environment or something threatening isn't always something that we have the chance to process in a conscious, I made that decision sense. But whenever we do perceive things and the signal is basically being interpreted and we're acting within fractions of a moment, we're talking about speeds that are in the realm of 60 milliseconds to 100 milliseconds, where it's so fast that by default we treat it as a threat. And we can't tell the difference, even if it is somebody or something that's familiar to us. That occurs at about 150 to 300 milliseconds. And even that is 400 times faster than our conscious mind at the prefrontal cortical level that comes on probably at about 1.2 seconds in comparison. So whenever we discuss the fact that we're upregulating, often the upregulation isn't just how much air we're bringing in when we breathe in, oxygen saturation at the cell respiration level, and residual saturation, that is after I exhale, how much oxygen I have that I'm still working with, that's within the realm of about 20 to 30% that I would have had in reserve, so to speak. Whenever we have this sense of I have to breathe out, often it's because the autonomic system is responding to something that could be potentially a threat, or if anything, something novel that we would probably carry into what we know as the unknown that we have to probably regulate up for to make sure, one, we have enough oxygen, two, we have a level of arousal where I can respond. And by default, I don't have to think about it really fast if I have to run from it or fight really well to be able to get away from it, or eat it or mate with it for that matter. But whenever we have this occur, by default, our skeletal muscles get the blood flow. The hemodynamics of cognition start to really show up in the sense that it goes away, the blood flow, away from the brain and goes to the body, and is now a default mode exercise and movement of blood to the muscles, the skeletal muscles, so I can get stronger and faster and run, hide, and climb. So the upregulation that I'm talking about has to do with levels of arousal. Sometimes hypervigilance and hyperarousal are terms that are used, but that means that our particular activating system is now aware and awakening the body to respond in whatever way is appropriate in our environment to encourage our survivability. But the upregulation often involves an increase in the amount of oxygen going in and CO2 going out. So we have an increase of respiration, not only mechanically, the inhale, exhale, wherever we have the intercostal muscles stretching to open up our rib cage to breathe in or inhale, but also our diaphragm dropping and creating a vacuum of sorts in our lungs to create a stronger vacuuming of the air that's outside of us to bring us in, so that we can open up whatever space we need to bring in extra O2 for that response, the sympathetic nervous response, where the body gets warmer, heart rate goes up, and we're getting ready to move quickly. Now, we upregulate many things there, but also we're upregulating not only levels of arousal, but our capacity to fight and protect. But at the level that we're talking about right now, breathing, it's our oxygen that goes up. We hyperoxygenate in a sense for a moment. We become hypoxic, but it doesn't stay like that for long. And we're not going to be taking little quick breaths where we start to do what's called hyperventilation. But we're trying to prevent a hypercapnic event wherever we have too much CO2, where we might get dizzy and then our body and our organs start acting kind of weird, like whenever we're underwater diving too deep, and we might pass out because we have euphoria and we've hyperventilated, have too much oxygen but no CO2, and then all of a sudden, ding, 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 we're out. We're floating somewhere at about 60 or 80 feet, and we're asleep as we drown. So that's not a good thing. But these things, once again, upregulation, downregulation of the breath is autonomic largely. Now, the breath can be brought under conscious control, and our autonomic system will override frequently whenever it thinks that we're doing crazy stunts. Well, you shouldn't be doing that to my organism. I'm breathing in, breathing out, doing something like Wim Hof breath, and I love his methodology. But even he says don't do it in the water because it could kill you. Many people have died as a result of trying to do free diving, thinking that they can lengthen the amount of time they can go without breathing in and diving deeply, and winding up with really severe events and even things like aneurysms, this sort of thing. But that's a very high-pressured situation, to say the least, and they're very unique. And this isn't to steer you away from breathing, but rather just sometimes people get overzealous and even get to the point where it becomes like politics, where people speak badly about folks that breathe through their mouth. And even the term mouth breather makes one sound like one's some sort of a Neanderthal. Not that they breathe through their mouth, just making a bad example, I guess. But the idea is this: we start getting on our high horse and making judgments when we ourselves cannot upregulate or downregulate effectively. And this is more so about not only longevity, but better performance in your life, not only in physical skill, but also my day-to-day interactions wherever I might talk to somebody. Maybe I'm an attorney. And if I'm out there speaking and being able to regulate how I breathe also determines how cool I am and how I am perceived, because my state can vary based on how I breathe. And if I get nervous and I start to sweat, I start hearing things and feeling like things are pressuresome, even though it's subjective and nobody's trying to hurt me, but yet knowing the value and the weight of what I'm doing could cause me to feel a lot of pressure and make me really want to perform as close to perfect as possible, even though perfect's an absolute. And mind you, there's probably a belief system driving that. So you can see where the pressure is, but you can also see wherever, if one stays in this hyper aroused or threatened state, then we're probably going to be more apt to use substances to bring that state down quickly because we don't like being there. Because one of the things that we do, if we do that frequently enough, is realize that not only is stress a habit, it's a pattern, but even our breathing is a habitually pattern conditioned response, which means if you breathe in a very dynamic, really working hard sense, then that's something you're going to have to decondition or learn how to do differently. And that's going to take time and practice. You can do it here and there as kind of like an injection of a difference in breath. But once you start learning how to do it and practice it, we become more accustomed and our body learns. It takes in the novelty of it. And at first it becomes the unknown. We might even get a little shaky and maybe not do so well with it. But once we do it regularly and the body realizes it, oh, we're doing it again, then it starts to adapt and allow us to breathe more, not only effectively, but more efficiently. And then we become good at it to where it becomes second nature. And then our blood pressure drops, heart rate measurable starts to drop as well, versus having this perpetual level of potential stress, even though maybe I'm not in any kind of danger. But once again, the upregulation can occur very well. Now, on the flip side of this, we're going to talk about downregulation. What is it that we are downregulating? Well, one of the things, too, that you can do as far as downregulation is state regulation. How tense am I? Can I downregulate my anxiety, my sense of stress, or my sense of threat? And yes, you can, because largely what we consider threatening in an environment where I could get hit or eaten or bitten, this sort of thing, we're looking at something that is external to us, an environment that we determine whether or not, one, can I get away from it? Two, can I stop it? And three, do I have the wherewithal to get away from it or maybe not necessarily have to endure what I'm predicting or expecting, because there's a belief quality there. So downregulation has to do with not only state, what state my body's in, but also what intention do I have and what am I attending to? What am I paying attention to? Because I can intend state stress reduction. And I'll give you, for instance, many years ago, I used to use HeartMath's little handheld tool, and it had a little earpiece that you'd plug in, which I thought was phenomenal. It was given to me by a friend, and I was showing him meditation. In exchange, he told me to use it to see if I could capture what it was that I was doing as far as skill with this little tool called the M-Wave. Now, I'm not plugging them. I'm telling you, if you want to go find their stuff, it's phenomenal. It's worth the money. And even the computer program is. And I don't get any kickback for it, but I'm telling you, it is a useful, worthwhile tool. Do seek it out. They have some cell phone versions, too, that you can get. But the reason I'm pointing this out is that just by intention alone, but by wanting to, in quotes, just wanting to regulate my measure of stress without necessarily changing how I was breathing, but just the desire to want to be in a state of less stress would cause a downregulation not only of my heart rate. My breathing changed a little bit, but it wasn't intentional. It was just me paying attention to where my thumb was touching that little sensor that determined how my relative stress was, and it went down measurably. And it had multiple programs, and it got to the point where I could very quickly intend, because I would do this almost daily, very quickly intend my level of stress, perceived measurable stress, to go down, and it did. Now, there were some master level stress levels that I was barely getting close to, but those would take probably more time than I had with the M-Wave before it decided to break on me. And what I will tell you is that just by intention alone, my desire gives my thought pattern a direction of I want to be there in the future. And what is there when I get there? A level of less stress, a feeling of ease and comfort, whatever it is that we label that as far as that state, and our body responds just by wanting. Now, this isn't me visualizing or making pictures in my mind. Those are all good, useful, powerful tools. Definitely sports psychology uses a lot of it, and we use it in hypnosis and general suggestion whenever we're doing sales, this sort of stuff, or even just trying to encourage somebody to come to our way of thinking. But the powerful thing on the downregulation thing is that what you attend to, what your attention is on, is not focused as like I'm looking at all the details, but rather just being aware of it and keeping my mind on it, so to speak, without necessarily labeling it and naming it and do it as a higher cognitive process. Just by virtue of my more visceral, perceptual sense of attention, and attention doesn't always involve your eyes. You can attend to things, you can listen to things with your eyes closed. You can see things in the dark without having to have details and still be aware of it, whatever it is that I might see the outlines of, and it may not be clear and hard line. I may be looking at a book in a dark room, and I can see the shape of it, but whatever it is, I'm aware of it, the distance and the size and all that. All those things get taken in, and that's being attentive. Attention is always on. You don't pay attention. We just become aware of our attention, and we tend to like to focus it and say that we're doing it somehow, but it's all actually being done already without our involvement, so to speak. It's just our being able to leverage that makes it a useful tool. But our intent, I want to be relaxed. My attention to what's going on in my environment also is coupled very closely to that. But to down-regulate oxygen, for instance, often if I want to hypervent, to do something like a meditation method or whatever, you can do it for a short period of time, but our body will downregulate what it is I'm doing because my autonomic nervous system, my parasympathetic nervous system, if I'm trying to arouse my energy levels or my breathing level to get excited and warm, it will want to go to the state of equilibrium that it can get to as quickly as possible once you stop doing the silly stunt at the prefrontal cortical level because, oh, that'd be neat to do. And yet it's telling you, no, I don't like to do that. It's about efficiency at the autonomic level, and it wants to stay there, and maintaining that sense of equilibrium or balance is always paramount to the body, because anything that raises that heart rate usually is involved with running from a threat or involving itself in a threat. And the parasympathetic has to do with the rest and digest qualities that often we do our friend and befriend with, and often we gain our higher cognitive processes that are most creative. We don't create very well when we're really super stressed. And often the downregulation involves a relaxation and not really a loss of tonus, but a softening of the tone of the musculoskeletal tissues, and less pressure in the kidneys and in the heart and the lungs. And there is also less limiting action to what we call the diaphragm and in the intercostal muscles, so we can breathe at ease. Even though we may not be mechanically breathing deeper, we're probably oxygenating better because we're not physically tense and we're not burning, in a metabolizing sense, more oxygen than otherwise we would be if we were stressed, for instance. So some very deep thoughts right there. Whenever we're regulating breath, it's probably a really good idea to know the three states of breathing that we generally occur. There are more, but these are the ones that are most primary. The thing is, whenever we're in the state of inhaling actively, generally speaking, if your structure is good and if you have no physical injury, and you're capable of breathing in through your nose, your body will regulate temperature through the sinuses and the sinusoid cavities. Whenever we're inhaling through our nose. When it's too cold, it warms the air. When it's really dry, it tends to moisturize it. Whenever it's too hot outside, it tends to cool the air that we bring in as we breathe. So that's a really important thing. When we mouth breathe, we tend not to get that benefit quite as much, and we tend to think we're breathing in more. And what it is a catch-up breath if we've been very tired and exhausted. But also, that kind of limits our ability to filter what it is that we're taking in. We probably increase our chances of immune function being triggered in the sense that we bring in more dust and bacteria, that sort of thing, without filtration through what, like cats have these turbinates. If you look at a skull, they look like these little filters that they go through, and our sinuses act in a very similar way. And that and the mucosal layers capture that so that we can minimize any assault on our body that could be considered a immune threat, so to speak, beyond just the physical. So some things to think about there. Now, inhaling, the state where we're hyperoxygenating usually has to do with how much oxygen we take in. It's called a hypoxic state if we have more oxygen than we need. And if you're in the opposite, where you're in a hypercapnic state, that means that a carbonic gas or CO2 is excessive, and that can cause us to trigger what we'd call a hyperventilation, to where our body starts to try to re-regulate itself. And sometimes it has a hard time doing that, especially if we go into anxiety panic mode at that point, which isn't far away many times. The other state that we have, that whenever we intentionally inhale or exhale with the intent of either having more oxygen or more CO2, those are generally stunts that our body will generally re-regulate on its own. If you start getting a little dizzy, you sit down, the body will take care of itself, just as long as you stop doing what may have induced those states. But the third state, I think, is probably one of the most fascinating. It's probably one of the more powerful ones too, is that whenever we exhale and hold our breath, when we literally let go all air and move. Have you ever gone walking and realized that when you inhale, or even when you're running and exhale, that it's not one for one swing of the legs and arms and exhale, one swing of the legs and arms and exhale, inhale, this sort of thing. What we do is that sometimes we will inhale and go 2 or 3 strides, exhale for 3 strides. And sometimes you may even exhale continuously, going through several strides before you inhale. Or if I do, like I swing kettlebells, do the same thing. And I don't necessarily match one movement for one breath. That's something you can do with Tai Chi, and it's actually rather good to help encourage relaxation and motion and oxygenation to the tips of the fingers. This sort of thing is rather wonderful in that sense. But whenever we're looking at the residual breath, when we breathe out, we are still quite capable, without inhaling, of moving, and our torso tends to consolidate. If you were to do something in the martial sense, to strike, or somebody's trying to hit you and you blew out all your air, you're not going to lose your air. It's going to hit you in the gut and then cause you to lose your oxygen wherever they caught you in an inhale. You're actually more solidified, more consolidated, and you become, I don't want to say heavier, but much more solid, so harder to move. But also you get mechanically stronger whenever you do that, because the whole of the torso is consolidated. There's no tension involved necessarily. It's just a matter of blowing out and staying that blown out, or that non-inhaled state, so to speak. And you're breathing at the cell level respiration, what we call the O2 sat, or oxygen saturation. And that can be a very helpful thing whenever you're in a dark place, wherever you may have to protect yourself and hide and not breathe, and know that you're not going to have to necessarily suck wind immediately because you feel like you're going to die. If you're relaxed and you do that, you can probably hold your breath for a good long time in many cases. And whenever you're capable of expanding the ribs when you're inhaling, and really train those as we get older, you don't necessarily have to be going through what many elderly folks do, where they have limited skeletal structure movement in their upper body and their torso, to wherever it sounds like they're breathing through a bag or a filter. And by keeping the lungs and the ribs fully expanding whenever you inhale and exhale, you encourage more efficient oxygenation, but also more comfortable states during times of stress. And we become more aware of the fact that even when we are dealing with things that are stressful, we don't necessarily have to feel like we're not able to breathe because we tense up and our heart rate goes up. We become more effective at drawing more air effectively and breathing out CO2 effectively. So we don't go into that fight-flight response. That is a state before it's ever a pre-conscious state, I should say, precognitive, before it ever becomes a cognitive process of, oh, this is getting difficult. So that's a lot in a little bit, and I just want to cover these areas of breath and breathing as foundation, having to deal with stress and regulating, but also realizing, what are we regulating? What are we down-regulating? What are we trying to keep even? And with the breath, the Lord of Strength, Qi, in the Chinese methodologies, these are the things that are not only foundational, but absolutely necessary to be aware of, so that we can become better at what it is that we want to do. Now, that's going to be it for tonight, and I certainly have had a good time talking to you about this. This is always fascinating to me. If you have any questions or even any feedback, please send it to the email at runningmangetskillsproject@gmail.com. I'd love to hear from you. Also, if you go to YouTube, we have the channel there. Please like, subscribe, and share. I'd like to see if we can get that channel to grow some. And on top of that, we're getting closer to getting the interview format taken care of. We're probably a little less than a month away when I start doing video interviews in addition to audio interviews, and I look forward to doing that. I'm really excited. I already have a couple of guests that I'm lining up, and hopefully there'll be some information that is not only useful to you, but also something that you can share with people as well. And for now, take care, breathe well, walk well.